could make it. Drake and I have been just digging into this. Really excited to dig a little deeper into the neuroscience. And so we wanted to put something together for you guys to be able to take practical applications from the deep neuroscientific level. And so that's what we're here to do tonight. So, you can go ahead and start.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. So really what we're taking a look at is the emotional brain, the limbic system, and how it relates to the thinking brain. So in the therapy world, the prefrontal cortex, or the cortices, so that's the last thing that kind of develops, and that's top brain. And now both of them serve a really good purpose. So if you think about it, like, oh, he's thinking with his head, or she's thinking with her emotional head, or her heart, leading with your heart, or wear your heart on your sleeve. We have a lot of these societal examples of when we're thinking emotionally, or when we slow down and we really put some thought into it. It's biblical too, and not going to bed angry, and then there's giving it time and waiting and thinking through it. So there's this really deep neurobiological balance between our emotional brain and our thinking brain, and there's wisdom in both of them. So the important is emotions really keep us alive. There are quick, fast thoughts, and our thinking brain, once we give it time and we're safe, really helps us map out the best path forward. So to thrive.
Yeah, you say it really great. It was we were created this way, and we were created with both. So there has to be a purpose for both. So we wanted to dig into a little bit about what that purpose is, and not being just on one or just on the other. So talking about brain and neuroscience, we have to talk about brain development first, because it all starts with that initial development. So how the brain develops is bottom up, back to front. What that means is we actually start on the spinal cord, and in development we start near it's called cauda equina, but it starts at the neural streak and then comes up. So the spinal cord starts to form around the third week or so, fourth week of gestation. And what that does is that then becomes the brainstem. And the brainstem is really important, so that's part of the bottom part. Brainstem is super important for all of the activities that help keep us alive in utero, and then right away after birth, because that's the autonomic nervous system side of things. So how well we're breathing, how much our heart's pumping, how well our digestion is, all of those come mostly from the brainstem area, which is where a lot of cranial nerves come to play, which go to different organs and different organ systems, part of that autonomic nervous system. After that, we move into more of the emotional brain, like Drake was talking about. That's the limbic system. The amygdala is the big one in there. And we get this amygdala fully formed right around birth. So that's why kids have tantrums and things like that. And you get kids crying a lot because they're driven by their emotions. They're driven by the ability, or the process to survive, because that's what their brain and where their developmental level is to survive. And then you move on to more, so the amygdala is near the back, kind of the bottom, and then we move towards the front, the prefrontal cortex. That's the thinking brain that we were talking about. And that's really after up to 17 years and more, we're still developing the prefrontal cortex.
25 is a pretty common age, but now with the amount of screen time and all kids are plugged into that, they're even saying as early as early 30s that your brain is still developing. And really the brain, if you guys have heard the saying, build this plane as we fly it. That's a common one I heard growing up. That's kind of how the brain is your body is like, oh, we'll worry about those higher order level things as you go through development. And that's why, the emotions, it's beautiful. 2-year-olds, they're 100% happy. Their whole body lights up with happiness. The mid centers of the brain really drive everything. And then as we get older, you can start putting the brakes on that, and that's the top of the brain.
And one of the really cool things about brain development is it's the exact same way that we see body development overall as well, talking about order mattering. Because the order that these develop matter. It's not necessarily the sequence matters, but the order matters most. We need to have this sequence of events in order to have proper brain development, nervous system development, and then developmental milestones moving forward. Thinking about crawling and walking with milestones, you have to crawl before you walk. That order is more important than if your kid walks at 9 months. If they didn't crawl at all, that's a bigger issue. So that order matters more. And one of the things is, it's like when you have to crawl before you walk. It's like giving the keys to the kid before they even know what a car is. So that's where that order matters. You need to follow that sequencing with development.
Yeah.
All right. So with that being said, we'll talk a little bit more about the specific brain structures. We alluded to a little bit with the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex, kind of the big two that drive the brain, drive these emotions, drive the thinking brain versus emotional brain. The bottom part of the brain is that limbic system. That's where the amygdala is. That's where the emotions are driving typically. That's the survival mode. When you're stressed out, your amygdala drives everything because you're in survival. And then we get to the higher order functioning, which is where the prefrontal cortex comes in. That's executive function of the body. So rational thought, impulse control, all the things that you would think of for higher order logical thought. And one of the really cool things, one of the cool structures in the brain is the hippocampus, which is like the teeter-totter between the top brain and the bottom brain. The hippocampus is important for memory in the body. And we can remember things from the limbic system, or we can remember things from the higher order prefrontal cortex as well. If you have something happening over and over again in the limbic system, that's where the kids remember and learn that a tantrum happens, or I throw a tantrum, I get this. If I do this, I get this. That not necessarily negative, but what's perceived as a negative behavior reward. Whereas you can also have memory and hippocampus interacting with the prefrontal cortex of 2 + 2 = 4. So those things are really important. Yeah.
Or with the tantrum, mom paused me. She got down. She sat with me. The ripples calmed down to cool water. Then we made a plan of when we get the sucker. Oh, after lunch. I don't get to escalate with my emotional brain. Mom's scared or dad's scared. And then we cave in and give the sucker. So the kid can remember when the ripples of my emotional system calms, now I have access. You're growing their top brain, their prefrontal cortex when you do that, when you slow down with them. But it requires someone else to do that. Using my prefrontal right now and pumping the brakes, I notice we get excited and we talk fast. A really cool way to remember this is, if you make a fist right now and your thumb's in it, your fingers on the outside are your top brain, your prefrontal, the thinking brain, and on the inside, if your thumb's in, is like the amygdala. So a real nice way as you're talking or thinking through it with yourself is, am I thinking top down here, or am I a little emotionally activated and thinking with my amygdala, or you're out of control?
Yeah, and just with that finger and the thumb analogy, that prefrontal cortex can, once you are like sitting down with your kids or whatever application you want to take from it, when you do that prefrontal cortex, when you access that higher function with your kids, with your family member, with your spouse, with your coworker, not only are you covering it up, but it's acting as a brake on the amygdala and that emotional side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thought we'd just take a slow little chart to look at the differences. Again, there's wisdom in both parts of the brain. So the emotional brain, again, keeps us alive. And so attributes of it is feelings, they give us a signal right away. So if we see a busy street, we don't have to slow down and think about it. We know, don't walk there or get hit by a car. But then once we slow down and map out the path, and we take kids who they see fast cars, or you're stressed out, you begin to map out, here's where the pedestrian walkway is, here's a sidewalk, we're safe here, we can keep bicycling on this side. So feelings come first with the emotional brain. And the example, if we take it to food, is donut, yummy, me likey. When you're go grocery shopping on an empty stomach, so if you think halt, hungry, anger, lonely, tired, if you're dysregulated and you're thinking more emotionally, you make quick decisions and you just get done with the situation right away. And so that's where you might grab the donuts and fill up with the Oreos like I did last night and the ice cream. But when we slow down and pause, oh yeah, I had goals, to eat a little cleaner and healthier. Yeah, I should have some fruits and veggies on the plate. So it comes slower, it takes effort. And again, if you think about that, just a simple visual, this is a lifelong up until mid 30s, early 30s. For a lot of us to keep building this, it takes time and drawing back on when you were able to make a wise decision. And then, as he said, the hippocampus with memory, you can begin to take a step back and remember when you had success, and then you continue to grow that, which we'll get into in a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anything
Perfect.
else on that one, Trevor?
No, that sounds great. That's awesome.
Cool. Okay. So we have our simple visual here. So we have the emotional brain, the amygdala, or the limbic system. Those are all kind of interchangeable words we'll use together. And then the thinking brain, or the prefrontal cortex. So order matters. So we process with our amygdala like 1/10 of a second. Now, higher orders of the brain, they require literal seconds to longer to process. And so let's give a situation where you have okay or not okay. So if you detect in 1/2 of a second that something is not okay, so you walk into home and the kids are flying off the wall, it's a mess, literal sirens going off, okay, feeling a little dysregulated. As a dad, when I come home, all of a sudden I have to take a second, I have to practice a pause with myself and slow down, because if I don't pause, if I'm just gas pedal with my amygdala, it's like we kind of wear red shaded glasses. You've heard seeing red when you're angry. I don't want to associate dysregulated with anger necessarily. When you're dysregulated, it really clouds how you process, because your emotional brain says, I'm not safe. And so then it bullies your higher orders of the brain to just keep me alive. And so what that looks like is quick, rash decisions. So over on the right, if you're dysregulated or unsafe, it bullies your brain into cognitive distortions, which may look like minimizing, rationalizing, justifying. Oh, that was all they had, or the kids were acting up, so I had to get the donuts. That's why I got the donuts in the cart, and then we headed home. That's what we had to do. But that's kind of thinking from a place of scarcity or the dysregulation. This type of brain, it wants the short term, right now. It wants instant gratification. So anything, just get over it. It sweeps things under the rugs. We'll deal with it later. Now, again, there's wisdom to that. There is wisdom to setting aside a problem for later. And sometimes you just have to get through it. When you're on trips with your family, when literal fires are happening, you don't care about the best decisions. You literally just take care of it. Now, if we live a pattern of that, it begins to cloud and warp, and we begin growing memories with the hippocampus of distortion. And so that can't be how we interact all the time. So then Trevor will take the next slide, which is...
So when we get into more of that safe space with our brain, with the emotional regulation, our emotional seat in the brain, that limbic system, that's when we really start to move from this, how do I keep alive, to how do I thrive. It unlocks that pathway between the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, and allows us to actually process through emotions, to process through those quick, rapid thoughts. This is where we're not driven by the stress and the emotion, and we're able to consciously make those decisions, and those decisions in a logical, reasonable order, and a reasonable response to those. This is where when we are able to have that safe emotional brain, it really unlocks that full potential that we can have with our prefrontal cortex, with our higher level thinking, and allows us to access to logic and make those good, full decisions. And that's where that delayed gratification comes into play instead of the instant gratification. It's the part of the brain, when we are able to unlock this more of a regulated state, we see these longer term, longer lasting help and results versus that instant, this is where I need to be to get out of this state, or this situation, or this place that I'm in right now.
So kind of just going back to our just simplicity, I find it's nice if we can take it simple, and then we can get more practical and higher later. If we're dysregulated and unsafe. It bullies our prefrontal, our planning centers. It literal, you can think about it like punching and bullying. But when this part is safe, like, okay, I got regulated, meaning my nervous system is calm and centered, then you just slowly wrap in and we find strength in that. And that's when you access the highest strength possible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just taking this and kind of putting it into, I love analogies and metaphors. When I work with families all the time, I'm drawing pictures and we're talking about stuff. And for this one, I want you guys to think about Lost in the Woods. Do you guys hike? You guys go hiking or hunting? Yeah? Yeah. So I was wondering if people would have the feeling of fear of, I lost my bearings or I got off the path. I have memories as a kid being in like Walmart and my mom was probably 2 aisles away and I lost. So this feeling of a lost in the woods, when your amygdala is active and you're nervous, you're overwhelmed, fearful, this is the state. And we're just going to use lost in the woods as kind of you're limited with your thoughts. All of a sudden you lose track of clarity and you start moving fast and you get even more tangled ball of yarn when we're coming from a place of fear. We talked about the Lamborghini and handing the keys to the car. This is when we're scared and we go right into the ditch. We overcorrect.
Yeah, and one of the practical part of this analogy is that lost in the woods could be when you come home, like you were mentioning, and the kids are screaming, running around. Wife is trying to cook dinner, but the kid's at her leg crawling or crying. Dogs are barking, whining, ready to be let out. And so all of those things overstimulate that emotional brain, or the cats are messing up with the chickens. And so all those things all those things work to stimulate that amygdala, that emotional state. And when we get dysregulated, that's when we have that limited set of the thinking brain. And we're going to talk a little bit about how that can lead into longer term things, either direction, whether you're regulated or dysregulated.
Yeah. Hey, so far, any questions or how everybody doing okay so far? We're kind of, I jacked about it. Thank you. This is awesome.
I have
so.
a quick question.
Yeah.
I wrote this down and I was pondering if I wrote it right.
Mm-hmm.
The hippocampus remembers distortions related to the emotional brain. Is that what you were trying to, I'm trying to tie it together. The hippocampus is what's going to lock in the memory of the emotion to the situation.
So we'll get into it shortly with wire together and fire together.
Yep.
So I think we'll get close to that. And when we get to that point, let's talk about hippocampus and the limbic system.
And we'll be sure we'll stop with plenty of time at the end too to make sure we can answer any more clarifying questions too. Yeah. So what do we do about it? This is what you guys are here for. So this is where the practical insight comes into play. What is our guide through the woods? Where is our compass? How can we navigate the situation that our bodies are in to get out of that dysregulated state?
Well, we don't hike and we don't drive Lamborghinis.
Yes, exactly. And then you're
don't
good to
have
go.
kids.
All right. Thanks for coming tonight. All right.
Oh, wait, I have 5 kids. Oh, no. Okay. Well, so really, have you guys seen Inside Out by chance? Oh, bummer. It's the Emotions movie. Okay, so it's this beautiful movie about this girl, Riley, and she has emotions inside her. And I won't give you guys spoilers. Highly recommend you check it out. So coming back to this, really, we have 2 wisdoms. So we have an emotional, a quick access, and then we have a longer term. And so balance is the key. So we have to team up with our emotions. I recognize our slide right now is missing the pictures. What we're missing here is
I think they're showing up on my side, so I think it's this.
Okay, gotcha. There's 2 people hugging here. Yep, Trevor and I won't demonstrate it, but there's 2 people hugging here, embracing. And then this one is a kid kind of scared. And then in the top one, they're thinking.
Thinking, talking, it looks like 2 adults talking.
Yeah, so the idea is if we're down here on emotional brain, really the key is, and Trevor's going to get right into it in the next slide, is co-regulation. We were not wired, we were not created to do this on our own. We were given womb inside our mom, and from the get-go, we begin co-regulation or co-dysregulation. And so, if someone else is nervous around us, it can trigger within us. Likewise, if we're an anchor, we have those rock people in our lives. If we can tap into them, we can calm the ripples. That would be relate. We can team up with their emotional brain, help calm down, and then together we can access higher orders. So we're kind of saying you can't really do it alone yet until you grow that. And Trevor will get into that right now.
Yeah, and continuing to grow that over a period of time. It's not a you guys are going to leave here tonight and you'll be co-regulated, good to go. It's a lifelong process to work on and continue to grow with yourself, with your spouse, your coworkers, your children, whatever, whoever that is that you're working on co-regulating with. And so, just like you talked about, this is really the key and the hack to life is that co-regulation, because you're able to then continue to process through these things together. We see co-regulating happening all the time. If you think about, mom's nervous system, moms gets nervous, and you'll notice that baby's heartbeat will also increase. So we have these things built into our bodies to respond to other people and to co-regulate with other people. There's mirror neurons in our body is one of the many different ways that we do that. And what those do essentially is I see Drake do something and I'm like, oh, wait, why is he nervous? Why is he looking around like that? And I start to do that.
Yeah.
We have the same thing when you go home with your kids. If you go home and there's a fire, the kids are screaming, the dogs are barking, and Drake goes,
calm down, Trevor, calm down.
Stop what you're doing. You got to stop every time, or he bursts out with anger every time he comes into the room. If he does that every single time, when he comes in the door, his kids are going to remember that based on his mirror neurons activating with his children's mirror neurons.
When you tell someone to calm down, you're also dysregulated, and you're telling them to calm down, kind of. So thinking about it in that way, co-regulation. Just pause for a second. So I have a business in the mental health field, and we do skill development and psychoeducation. Co-regulation is such a huge component of that. Birth to 3, Betsy and I were colleagues before, and in birth to 3 world, it is everything, co-regulation. It really is the thing to consider. Now, Trevor and I are co-regulating, being there for one another in presentation, and we kind of bounce out. This is a nice, small, intimate group. I can tell it's nice to just interact together.
Yeah. One of the cool things about regulation in general and co-regulation is there is, just like development, there is a hierarchy of that co-regulation as well. And that's kind of one of the things that we have on this slide when it pertains to children. So we have different ways that we co-regulate. First, with kids when they're developing and being watered from young age, that first person they're looking to have co-regulation with is parents. After parents, that's when we get to a non-parental adult. So my kids, C and Drake, they're going to be co-regulating with Drake as well. And after that, that's where the peers comes into play. So we have this hierarchy or this sequence of co-regulation happening, as well as the sequencing in so many other parts of our bodies.
Baby spends all their time with mom and dad, and then the baby has aunts and uncles, and then it has their teachers at school or their babysitters or nannies, and then eventually and beyond. So these are the influences, and so taking that time really with a young mind especially, and sharing that, because eventually they'll co-regulate or co-dysregulate with peers.
Yep.
And that can be tough.
Yeah. Jake, you got that one?
Oh, sure, yeah. So I want you guys, have you guys cooked eggs with a young child before? Okay. This is classic co-regulation. So I really want you guys to think about a time when that went successful, and you're like, man, I'm so proud of myself, I'm proud of them, I'm proud of us going through it. I don't know if you guys can remember an icky time that went. I can remember when I've been stressed out and my kid's cracking eggs, goes all over the floor. The other kids come, seems like they slip in it and they want to do it. Everybody's tugging on me, and now I become stressed out, and that can lead to co-dysregulation. So really what co-regulation does is it gives you, the adult, a chance to incubate or to step into a garden. It takes a step away and give the child a chance that they recognize something as unsafe. Oh no, dad's going to yell at me. He's so angry I smashed his egg all over the floor. But you practice the pause with them, and you smile, and we got this, and you clean it up. So now what they thought was a tsunami or waves, a storm, you let them step into the eye of the storm with co-regulation and protect their nervous system. You give it a pause. And now they have a memory, so kind of tying into your question, Betsy, now they have a hippocampus midbrain emotional memory. I thought I was not okay, but I was actually okay. So it fine-tunes, it pulls the levers, and it twists to know this is typical. Like sometimes we spill the milk, sometimes we crack the eggs, and it's okay. This can happen at school, it can happen in any setting you can think of, at the grocery store, when something feels too big. Now, luckily, as adults, we've been through it and we felt it, and then we can give that gift now to a scared mind. So really, as the influencers, that's a gift you can give, is to maintain that rock steady. And then when you actually do yell because they're running into the road, they know it's a problem. Stop, drop to the floor. Dad's like screaming at me. Mm-hmm. He's dysregulated because he's nervous. He's thinking quickly. Turn up the volume and stop.
Perfect example of the reason for emotional seat of the brain. We want that quick thought. We want the quick thought, Dad. We want the quick thought from kid running into the street too. Very reasonable response for there versus not.
Dad's scared. I should be scared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we talk about a lot of these things in that parental perspective, but you can take the same application in your work life or with your spouse. You can be like, okay, and I am going to get all this stuff done so that when my wife comes home, we're going to be great. And, oh, shoot, I forgot to do the dishes. How is she going to respond when I come into the thing? And how is she going to respond when she comes home and comes into the room? If she's dysregulated, she might be like, oh, you didn't do anything. Why didn't you do this? X, Y, or Z. And then you're all of a sudden into that state of, I did this, because you're also dysregulated through that as well. We're punching, we're fighting, versus if she comes in and she's regulated and sees, oh, dishes aren't done. It's not that quick reaction of, oh, dishes aren't done. It's, oh, the rest of the house is clean. The kids are put together. Bad dinner is made. And so they can have more of that rational thought and less of that necessarily instant gratification that our bodies do crave sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with co-regulation, we do need to still crawl before we walk with that as well. Just like developmental milestones, we need to work on the little things, and we'll bring it back into kids, having them being in a regulated state with your kids when they do something like break the egg on the counter and it doesn't go in the bowl or it goes on the floor. If you are able to respond to that in more of a regulated state over a period of time, you're building on that reaction in the kids, you're building on those mirror neurons in the kids, and you're building in the hippocampus of the kids of this is how a regulated reaction should be. And now we can not only co-regulate right there, but we can step back a little bit and allow them to build that regulation inside themselves and with their peers, with their siblings, with their, whatever you want moving forward. And that small growth, or the growth that you continue to build on that, will then lead into more of that higher capacity to have higher gains. So we have to master the simple things, master those simple regulations, which seem like a small thing with the egg breaking, in order to iterate those larger gains. When they move into friends, they talk, they're going through school, they're going through sports, how well are they regulating through those things, driving, having relationships, or even as parents themselves. So all of these things build on one another, and that's what we'll talk about here a little bit more as well.
Yep, from the ground up. Yep. So it's not about the end objective. It's about how we get there. And so there's hundreds of examples of that. So, an example with young kids, oh, why isn't my kid talking? Why isn't my kid talking? And we're kind of stressed out about that. And we know that when we're able to spend time in the car together, when we share where we're looking, we're co-regulating. When they're scared and we're present, we have the space with them. That allows their mirror neurons to start imitating other things like single words or actions. Even higher up at work, I just got a couple employees now in onboarding, and it's really a process. Like, if I want them to learn about the end things, how we show up in a meeting and we're calm together and we have a back and forth rhythm is important, because if we don't have trust, if every time we meet we're not using our higher orders, then we're not really going to get the best bang for our buck and stay regulated together. So you really you walk up the stairs, the small things matter on the way. When you're getting to Disney World, it's important. We pack up the car, we're driving, we make a pit stop. People are going to have to use the restroom. There might be delays. The whole trip is about the process, not just Disney World. And even at Disney World, this is meta, so layers to the onion. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, and you talked about, when you're at work and you're dysregulated and you're not able to access that higher logic, just like we talked about earlier, not unlocking that full potential, whether that's at work, whether that's with your kids, whether that's with your spouse.
Yep. Yeah, so I want to shine a flashlight on a sad reality. Not all of us had a warm, gentle co-regulator growing up. So we were talking about order matters. So in utero, at birth, as a young kid, as a school-age kid, and on, our brain builds the plane as we fly it. So I'm 32. You might have this, I didn't have co-regulators. What do I do? Well, it's not your fault, but really in my field a lot, we talk about it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility. Or it's not your fault, but it's our nervous system. So taking that accountability with what are steps awareness is the first step to change. And so now that I'm aware of it, how do I find trusted co-regulators to begin to calm the ripples, access the eye of the storm? So you don't have to do it alone.
Yeah, you find those co-regulators that fit well with you, find those co-regulators that are going to be with you for the long term, because it's important to have some consistency over a period of time, over the long term, to continue to build that regulation to build those pathways on a regulated level. And don't feel bad that you did, or you're not co-regulating, or you have this dysregulation, because sometimes it's as simple as you don't know what you don't know. And that's what we're here doing today, is getting you guys information so that maybe you can pick something up that you haven't heard of before, or you can change something going on in your situations, your lives, to be able to start to shift that, because like we're going to talk about in a second, the body can still change, and the body can adapt and process through things.
Yep, it's plastic. It's like Play-Doh. Yep. We don't have to do this alone. We find integrity. So doing what you say you're going to do. We start to find areas of truth. It might be at church, or it might be, with a trusted friend outside of your family. Might be with like a boss, another department you really respect. But really trying to seek out people who are truth. They speak in truth into your life. So that you don't need to know 10 steps ahead. We just need to co-regulate to the next step ahead. Yeah, so kind of practically, we're lost in the woods. Back to the analogy, we're overwhelmed. We're not able to find a path out. So a co-regulator is someone who has access to a way to calm. They have access to calm. They're the rock. So now we have one little path through the woods that we can find. This allows us to unlock a hippocampus memory in a positive way. So I was able to do what they did. I accessed calm. So again, instead of telling Trevor to calm down, we're just presenting, and we just take a breath. You don't have to say anything to each other. We just neurocept, or our perception. We have a trusted person and we just do it. Instead of say calm, just show them calm. And then that's access to one step out of the woods.
Yeah, and that co-regulator that's going to be there, just like you said, is going to be that trailblazer to work on getting you out of the woods. Not necessarily the fastest, because it's a process over time, but they are going to blaze that trail for you with their regulation, and then you co-regulate together, which then builds into the next step, which is that neuroplasticity. And so this is a big fancy word, and it just means that the brain can change. It's the brain's ability to change. And so what essentially you can take from this is that nerves that fire together wire together. So when you're encountering the same process over and over and over again, you're building those synapses in the brain to go from just a deer trail in the woods to a boardwalk through the woods, so that this process can happen quicker and on a more regular basis, and can happen without necessarily all the time it takes to do so. Think about if you are getting stressed, or you have a path to follow, so that when you are stressed, because life still happens, people still get stressed, but you now have a pathway to be able to co-regulate and co-regulate with yourself, which is what we're going to get to in a second. But the caveat to neuroplasticity is it doesn't always have to be good. You can also build that neuroplasticity in a dysregulated state. This is where, if you have the amygdala and the emotional seat of the brain come into play, the amygdala and the hippocampus will come into play as well, where you're learning that negative reaction, that dysregulated reaction over and over and over again, it becomes easier and faster to respond in that quick negative way, because the pathway is there, but the pathway is there to a dysregulated state.
Yeah, so kind of tying in, Betsy, I think your question was related to the hippocampus and the memory, remembering dysregulated states. Was that? Yeah. So I forget the author talking about, you kind of start to become, again, related to mirror neurons, we imitate, we're neurobiological, we're wired to grow up imitating others. You spend time around 5 people, and that's what you start talking their mannerisms, you start behaving like them. You hang out with people at work that are one way, you start to become like that. So that's kind of like, if we're consistently experiencing life with people, and then we begin to notice how they handle problems, sweeping it under the rug. We begin to develop highways in woods to sweeping. We become really good at sweeping under the rug. If we start to access time with other co-regulators that help us develop memories of handling a problem in a way we didn't think about, taking time and digesting versus distracting. Now it might just be a mouse trail, and then it might be a rabbit trail, and then a fox, and then a deer, and then a cow, and then a full-blown 7-lane highway towards regulation. But it takes time to grow that when we spend time with trustworthy people.
And this is really where it becomes that lifelong thing, because you may be in that consistent pathway of dysregulated state, but because of how our bodies were created and because of neuroplasticity, we can absolutely change that too. And we can go and build, almost like taking down this boardwalk, and taking down
use the boards,
use the boards and create a new regulated pathway instead.
Well, actually, you don't use the boards, because it's old habits die hard. I mean, there's lots of these common sayings we have, and so you have these deeply constructed pathway to gasp when something happens in front of you, and it's like, that's hard to undo. But it can happen with time. Yeah. Right. So this is really, a lot of the roots with education I had was in birth to 3, so I continually reference raising kids and doing it from that sense. So we kind of wanted to talk about practical examples of co-regulating with young kids, a little older, and then beyond. So what do you guys have young kids? Just him?
Just he's the young kid.
He's
He's the toddler.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Well, definitely. I can see it. Yeah, and that should remind me, how many grandkids do you have?
3.
You have 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just taking a moment. How we show up with someone, we can show up on a spectrum of coldness or warmth. Right away, if we show up in a cold, quick, speedy, we start showing up in a cold way, remember the brain responds in an unsafe or dysregulated way. So really warmth. Now, I'm not saying everything is sunshine and daisies and to sugarcoat everything, but you can deliver a consequence or a boundary not punitively. You can do it in a warm, matter-of-fact way. This is how it is kind of way. So that's just kind of noticing the continuum of warmth and coldness. Showing up with attunement. So attunement's related to your focus. So people can tell when you're locked into them or when the lights are on but nobody's home. So that's another, I love these common sayings because they speak truth into when you're not attuned to somebody, you can kind of tell. And so really taking your focus, putting it up on a shelf, that's what we do if we have our top brain, prefrontal cortex, cortices. We say, hey, I'm going to get to my point. First, I'm going to attune to your point. And so you show up that way with the kids. So really tantrums, a lot of what I found to be truth is that's a behavior that's trying to ping, it's trying to serve, it's trying to communicate, I need help. I don't have this under control. And so when you get down to their level warmly, you get close to them and you focus on what they have to say, repeat it back with them, they begin to feel like they understand me. And now that's safety. And just because you understand someone doesn't mean you agree with them. Just because you understand your 2-year-old wants more cookies doesn't mean you give them more cookies. Or maybe you do. But you show up in a so now on to responsive. So I'm going to take what you said and I'm going to start. That's our starting point. Sounds like you want more cookies. Sounds like you want to go outside. Sounds like you want to jump on the couch. That's fun. I like to have fun too, but we can't do that here. So we can jump, downstairs or whatever. So that's practicality is showing up, shelving what you want, taking your flashlight, your focus, and centering it on what they need. So begin with the other person. Yeah, you come in from the house and, or you come in and you're stressed out. Just telling yourself, I don't need to solve this right now, but I will solve it in just a moment or in just a little bit. Everything can wait a minute.
Yeah, then moving into friends too. You want to move in that one too?
Yeah, yep. So AVE is something that stands for acknowledge, validate, and empathize. So again, when you shelf your agenda, when you put what you need up and you wait for it later, one of the first ways we can show up warmly with someone is really acknowledge, repeat it back to what they're saying. So this ties into active listening. It comes from repeating back exactly what the person said. You can say the same sentence they said and the same last 3 words. You active listen, you repeat it back to them in their same tone. What this really does is if you think a scared horse out on the wild, wild west and it's going crazy and you join your horse alongside them, grab the reins, grab them, stay close, and now together our horses are going to slow down. But what you first do is you saddle up and you meet them at the energy where they're at. We're not going to stay at that high energy, but you meet someone where they're at to let them know I understand you, I acknowledge what you're going through. I would feel that way. You validate, I would feel that way. And then empathize, you put yourself in their moccasins and you say, that's how I would feel too. And finally, the last part is, now that the ripples are slowly calming down, ask open-ended questions. In our field, motivational interviewing, this is what it is. I don't know where we're going to go, but I'm going to start with an open-ended question. And so when you're speaking with a friend, your spouse or a friend at work or just anybody, instead of telling them what they should do, which triggers, we almost have a knee-jerk, like, nah, you don't understand. You have no idea, you don't understand. Instead of telling people what to do, asking them more details about it in an open way signals safety to the bottom brain so that they can make the best decision for their life that they can. So what would it look like if it was better? If you had a magic wand, how would you fix it? Those are kind of open-ended questions, like, where do you think we should begin? It's not telling them, I think you should begin with X, Y, or Z. Yep.
Yeah, and exactly. It's friends, it's coworkers, it's spouses. This is where all of these would come into play with those scenarios. And then lastly is co-regulating with yourself or self-regulating. But we all have patterns formed in our minds, or we have all patterns formed in our bodies from when we were kids and watered as we got older and older. And it's important to continue to build co-regulation in ourselves too. Whether that's co-regulated patterns or dysregulated patterns, regulated or dysregulated patterns in our body. And in order to change those, along with the co-regulation of our friends, or with our friends, with our spouses, with our co-workers, we need to be able to co-regulate with ourselves. We need to be able to give ourselves permission. We need to be able to work on building and breaking those existing neurologic patterns, because like we said earlier, ultimately your nervous system, it's your responsibility. And as adults, we're not made to be driven by emotions and by that limbic system, but more so by the higher order rational thought for the majority of the time, other than when your kid does run out in the street, you want that amygdala on. But you need to be able to help. You need to be able to work on picking yourself up and getting your body into more of a state of that regulation through everything that we've already kind of talked about tonight.
Drawing on success from the past.
Yeah.
So when did this go well for me in the past? So this guy on the top of the step kind of symbolizes a hippocampus memory of a time when I was stressed out and I was able to access thinking. So taking breath, going for a walk, gazing into the distance, low repetition, simple things, pacing. So there's a lot of ways we can soothe our nervous system, thinking about, what would someone else do? Or these are ways you can begin. And now, from a Christian perspective, co-regulating with yourself, the Holy Spirit lives within all of us. So being able to tap in and ask ourselves, God, for help and access to that.
Yeah. And now I would be remiss if I didn't mention chiropractic care in this slide as well. Because, we're here at the chiropractor office. So one really cool thing, I'll do a little blurb about it. One really cool thing about in literature and research that recently came out is they found that with specific neurologic chiropractic adjustments, it actually stimulates part of that prefrontal cortex directly. So that's another way to help and put those brakes a little bit more on the amygdala. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we went through a lot of information, but it's really important to take note that there is the two parts of the brain, and they're both there for a reason. It's never good for the amygdala to run the show all the time, but it's also important for it to be able to show up when it's needed. Yep. We need those emotions when they're needed. If a bear came in here, we want the emotional brain on. We want it on fast. And then
deadlines at the end, and there's times you're tired, but you still got to keep driving. We still got to get home.
Yeah. And the way to be able to do that and unlock both of those is to get into more of a regulated state. And in order to do that, we need to team up with our emotions. Just like on the triangle, we need to relate, reason, regulate. We need to relate, and then we need to be able to reason. And we do that through our co-regulation.
Yeah. Yep. So teaming up may look like, I know I'm on Highway 48 and I'm trying to get to the presentation tonight, and they have this road work. I don't know if you guys been on 48, but it's kind of messy right now. Teaming up is, all right, you're not getting there when you wanted to, but it's going to be okay. We're going to get there ahead of time, and teaming up is acknowledging that your brain, there's a reason why I wanted to get here 30 minutes early, but I'll just have to be okay with 15. And then you learn, you access next time, maybe I should map out and plan, is there any road work or any detours going on? And those are hard things. All the time I'm like, do I have my keys? Do I have my wallet? I make mistakes. And so when you can team up and acknowledge, shame makes us feel like we are a bad person, but guilt, kind of feeling guilty, would be the healthy wisdom of our emotional brain, where sometimes there is a reason we should work to be able to get on time or to be able to do things in a certain way. So so it gets easier with time. So you start small and the trail grows. The wire together, fire together is just like, I don't know if you guys make candles with wax, and you dip it in one time and it's like, did anything get on the string? Dip it in the wax and it coats more, and then eventually you have a candle. That's one candle, and it takes a lot of candles to wipe up a house. And just like the neural pathways, we got to practice with a calm person each time to access these.
Yeah, we have that trail blazed in the woods, and as you go more and more, that trail gets wider. People start going on it more. You got boardwalk. And people start going on it more. You got lights on the trail. It's a safe trail, but again, that's just one trail, and there's hundreds of trails, there's thousands of trails in the brain that the body's working on at all times. So that's where it's that lifelong as well.
And co-regulate, being successful, going back to, it's not about making an omelet with your kid. It's about cracking eggs and participating with cleanup and making an omelet in a way such that we didn't burn the house down on the way there. So that's what the journey is, what it really is about. So
yeah, exactly. And just like the last bullet point is you can't do it alone, especially when you have dysregulation from the start. If you didn't grow up with warm, co-regulated parents, responses, grandparents, things like that. But because of how our brain and our bodies were wired, we can adapt and we can process through things. Eventually you can learn to do it on your own. Yeah. All right. That's all we have for you guys tonight.